I think writing my first 3-chord song was my happiest, most joyful, most triumphant moment ever because it worked. And it was so hard for me to get there. I think when you don't have that knowledge and you're working with something that you don't have knowledge of, it's way easier to get to that harmonic choice because you just don't know all the other options. But when you're coming with all the other options in your bag, you know, it's like you're going to the beach and you have this like bucket and it's got, you know, a shovel and it's got a, you know, it's got all these cool things and like you can build the coolest sandcastle, you know, but when you come with a bucket and a shovel and that's it, there's only a certain amount of things you might think of or be able to do just because you don't have all that stuff. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that your castle isn't going to look like a castle, you know? It'll look cool. It'll just look different. And in pop, what I discovered was like the complexity lies in the, not in the harmony, but in the melodies and the craft of the lyrics and how you phrase those lyrics within the lines and the rhythm of the lyrics and the melodic rhythm and also the production, like what is supporting the emotional impact of the song and how do you do that in a way that feels honest and doesn't feel overbearing, but also like carries you on a journey.
Welcome to the Vocal Lab. I'm Sarah Ramsey, and this show aims to pull back the curtain on the entertainment industry, where veterans give up-and-coming artists some of the information they wish they'd had when they were just starting out. Sort of a music industry primer, if you will. Welcome to the Vocal Lab. I am so thrilled today. We have Kat Reinhert, who is a singer, songwriter, and a very fancy professor of songwriting and all the songwriting things. She's inspired by a rich background of jazz, folk, and popular music styles while seamlessly weaving story and sound with depth, imagination, and creativity. Singer and songwriter Kat Reinhert is an artist whose music defies categorization. She has released 5 full-length albums and 4 singles and is in the final production stages of 4 new self-produced singles to be released this year in 2024. Reinhert is a full professor of songwriting at Berklee College of Music in Boston and BNYC in New York City, and is the co-founder of Songwriting for Music Educators, a company dedicated to empowering music educators to write songs and then share that knowledge with their students. Kat also runs a private studio online where she teaches contemporary voice, songwriting, and entrepreneurship. She is also a published author with chapters in over 10 books, as well as a co-author of 2 books and the editor of another, and is a frequent presenter at conferences, as well as a guest artist and lecturer at several universities during the year. She splits her time between New York City and Boston and loves knitting, spending time with her husband, and playing with their orange tabby Otis. Thank you for joining me today, Kat. And we might just spend the next hour and a half talking about cats now.
I mean, we could totally do that. That would be amazing. Like how he likes to eat my legs. And I'm just like, why? Why do you like my legs? Stop.
My cat, I came home after getting my hair done this morning, and my cat was all like interested because I guess it had hairspray in it, and he was sniffing, and then he bit my eyebrow.
Oh my gosh.
Just like a little love bite. Just, I'm interested in this smell. It's new.
Oh my goodness. Oh.
Anyway, so do you want to tell us your story briefly for people who are just meeting you for the first time? A little bit about who you are and how you came to where you are, where you are in the biz now?
Sure. Let's see. Where do I go? I grew up in Wisconsin, in a really small little town. At the time, I remember this because I thought it was funny. It had 4,444 people and 1 stoplight. And that just, I don't know, stuck with me for some reason. I still haven't written a song about that, but it probably needs to happen. I was really actually interested more in graphic design and art, like drawing. But in the small town where I grew up, I didn't really understand that you needed to have like a portfolio to apply to college and do those kinds of things. But I'd been in choir and I'd play piano And so I auditioned for different universities, and I ended up actually at Lawrence University, which is in Appleton, Wisconsin, which is where I discovered that you could take voice lessons, because that was never anything that had even occurred to me living in a really small town where I took piano lessons, but like you could either sing or you couldn't.
Yeah.
And there wasn't any other option, so, and I stayed there for 2 years and then really fell in love with jazz at that time. And they didn't really have a vocal jazz program. I studied jazz with Ken Shaphurst, who is now the head of jazz at NEC, New England Conservatory, here in Boston. But at the time, he was the jazz person at Lawrence. And I actually... I decided to leave schools when I failed my juries, actually. And you'll appreciate this, because after a year and a half of voice lessons, I was asked to sing a classical jury of 3 songs and a jazz jury of 3 songs back to back. Yeah.
Oh, that's a big style change.
It's a really massive style change, especially when you're not really getting help in the one style. Like I had almost no help figuring out jazz like style singing, except for like transcribing like solos and just trying to emulate people. But like, that wasn't anything that I worked on in my voice lessons.
Yeah.
So, so I started already looking at schools, and I got into the Manhattan School of Music. And so I transferred schools and then finished my bachelor's degree in jazz commercial voice at the Manhattan School of Music.
No more 3
and then
juries.
No, as a teacher of voice today too, like I just can't imagine what people were thinking, that was okay. Because it's such a different like way of using the voice. It's a different way of understanding music. It's like, and I'd never sung classical music before either, like ever, until I like learned, I don't know, something from the console that was in English, for my audition. And somehow I don't even remember how I learned them, because I had no real help, it was just figure it out. And this was like a while ago. So that was like 1994. So that was, a long time ago, but,
that was right around the same time I was doing my juries.
Yeah. And that was when I was auditioning for schools. First, it was 1994. And then the juries were like 1996, when I moved to New York. So I moved to New York, got my degree. And then my goal was like, I'm going to be a famous jazz singer, which I sort of laugh at personally, because it's kind of an oxymoron. A little bit. A little
in
less
this day and age,
but but then it was like, well, there's Ella and there's Billy and there's Sarah, but like, who else, And I did gigs around town, and was doing like a lot of restaurant gigs and, anything that would, kind of have jazz kind of in the background was usually what I was playing. And at that time, there were a fair amount of places to do that in New York. But then I also started working for a company called Education Through Music, and they are a nonprofit that helps. At that point, they worked with a lot of teaching artists, and so they would give you all these tools to like learn how to teach. And then I was actually in a parochial school in the Bronx for a couple years, and I was teaching like K through 8, like general music. Not what I had envisioned, but it paid really well, and I didn't hate it. And at least not at first. And I stayed there for a while, and then kind of, I love little kids. I think they're awesome. I think teaching them was really fun, and rewarding in a different way. But I was trained as a high-level jazz musician, and that was not like ta-ta, ti-ti-ta wasn't really, it wasn't what I was, I didn't feel I was using the skills that I'd been trained to use.
You know what? There are some people for whom that's going to be like super fulfilling. And those are the people who should be doing that job. And for some people,
agreed,
that's not the right fit. And that's great too.
1,000%. And I have so many friends that are music educators, and they adore it, and I support them, and they're amazing, and they love it, and I didn't hate it. Like, it was cool. It was just this kind of back of the head thing that like, I could make the differentiation between like, I liked engaging with education. Like I really liked the teaching part of it, but I had this kind of awareness that that particular demographic wasn't where I felt most useful as an educator. And so I started making moves to figure that out. And I got somatic voice work certified and learned about how to teach voice because I was starting to get requests and I was like, I don't have any idea how to help you. So then I did that and started, kind of working around with like high school students and then decided that I needed to get a master's degree. So this is like 7 years later. And so I got into the University of Miami Frost School of Music in their jazz vocal it was a jazz vocal performance degree when I entered. And halfway through, I decided that I wanted to do the pedagogy degree instead because the only difference was you got 4 extra credits of classes to take instead of a 4-credit recital. And I had already been performing for like 7 years in New York. And so I was like, well, let me like use and invest my finances in something that will help me learn. So I did that and then moved back to New York and put together my first, my second record because I'd put one out like after I graduated from Manhattan School of Music. But you can't find it anywhere. I'm really glad about that. It's only in analog form. And somewhere around there, I also started writing songs and getting help writing songs because when I was at MSM, I actually started, but I had I didn't have a lot of luck with that when I was in school. Mostly because I would bring stuff to ensembles and the response I got was like, well, you can't do that. You need to sing the other people's songs. Like that's your job as a jazz singer.
I think that is a thing. Like I went through a jazz program as well in the early mid 90s and it was, you learned standards. Like you had to learn the book and that was that.
Yeah.
And I know that like generationally that has shifted. I know that the kids these days, no, but the kids who are going through now, the interest in learning standards is not, it doesn't sit the same way. And there's a much bigger interest in creating new music and original music in a genre that for so long that was frowned upon. You weren't supposed to be creating new music in jazz. You were supposed to be playing standards.
1,000%. And that's what I got. And, and so it was, I sort of still did it because I'm one of those people that like you tell me no. And I'm like, well, then I'm going to do it anyways. But it was frustrating because they would, the trumpet players or the piano players, they would bring in original music and we would play it in the combo. And I was like, well, what about mine? And I wish that they just told me like, hey, this isn't very good, but this would make it better, that I'd gotten help on the actual pieces. And I agree with you, like it has changed. And I'm so glad that it has changed because there's so much creativity in the genre and in like all of it. My friend Nicole Zaritis just won a Grammy for the best jazz vocal, right? And like it's all original music and it's amazing, so I'm so glad that was, but I started writing songs, put out a record, did more teaching. But at that point I was doing mostly like high school, and a little bit of college, but I was struggling to get college jobs, with a master's degree. And then I had a life event where I got divorced. And so, at 36, I was like, I am single with no kids and I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. And a PhD sounds like a really great idea.
Back to school.
And I was on a run and I was like, I'm going to design a contemporary vocal program. That's what I'm going to do. Because I was really, really big into contemporary vocal, like science and the teaching of all that. I mean, as an artist, I was writing songs and putting out albums and doing all that. But what was, bringing in income was like a lot of teaching. And so I got in, and I actually, the program that I have a degree in is I have a PhD in music education. Because, at that time, Shenandoah, and this was 2014, or 2013 when I was applying to programs, Shenandoah University is the only program in the United States where you can get a doctorate in contemporary voice.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, you still had to sing arias to be accepted. And I didn't do that. So they have changed that, which I'm also very grateful for, in, anyone else. But yeah, so University of Miami offered me a kind of, thing that was really appealing, and that I was the teaching assistant for the contemporary program. So I was teaching all the contemporary stuff, songwriting, contemporary voice, popular theory, ensembles. But I was getting a degree in my degree was in music education. Yeah. So it was it's a pretty small school. And so we worked out a compromise where this was my skill set, and I was able to help both departments. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
And in the process of doing that, I discovered that if I wanted to actually design a contemporary vocal program, I needed to understand the larger umbrella of popular music education and higher popular music education and how it worked. And so my dissertation actually ended up being a deep dive study into how the popular music programs at the University of Miami and the University of Southern California started, and how they design their curriculum and how they run, and like a comparative analysis of the two.
Yeah.
And you can find it on my website. It's a fully downloadable free PDF, because I feel like that should be available to anyone who wants to read it, because there's a lot of gatekeeping in higher ed and in academia. And I've never been a big fan of that. So anything that I can put up that's, legally able to do that, I think it's important. That. Thanks. Yeah. And then I graduated and they hired me, actually. So I was the director of contemporary voice at the University of Miami, and I was working with all these songwriters and all this production students, and I was working with ensembles and teaching voice. And it was a dream job, to be honest. It was a dream job. I had a beautiful office. I lived a mile from the school. It was like, if a job had been written for me, this was the job, but I'd also gotten remarried while I was in school, and my husband and I had been long distance. So he lived in New York and I lived in Miami for 5 years.
That's hard.
And it was so hard. And then it just sort of hit me like, you know what? I really want to dive back into being an artist. I've been doing this educational thing for a really long time, and I dug deep, and I was the president of an international organization for popular music, and I wrote chapters and articles and booked things and conferences, and I did the whole thing, I went in deep, and it was great. But there was still this part of me that was longing for and the thought I had was hey, what happens if I put all this energy into being an artist?
Yeah.
What might happen? And so I resigned from UM. And then in September of 2019, I moved back to New York City to pursue being an artist. I have the best timing in the world because 6 months later, the world shut down. Which, I don't know. Good, bad, I'm not sure. I actually look at the time during the pandemic and the lockdown, especially in New York. It was actually really needed time for me.
Yeah.
I didn't know it, but I was extremely burned out and tired and overwhelmed. And I hadn't really, I'd put out a record, I'd recorded a new album while I was teaching, and it was in the bag. It had been all recorded by September 2019. And then I decided to sit on it because I was waiting to see if I got a grant to finish it. And I didn't get the grant, but by then it was March and the world shut down. And so it ended up getting mixed remotely, and I put it out the following year. But it just, I really wanted to feel and like dig into that. And so I was able to actually spend that 2 years. I learned guitar. Mm-hmm. I now play guitar, mm-hmm. Which I never did until I was 44. I'd owned one, but I like seriously practice. I had time to practice for 2 hours a day. Yeah. I have a whole bag of songs. Like I can play an entire 2-hour gig on guitar by myself. You know, like I wrote all kinds of songs. I learned how to produce. I worked a lot in Logic. Like it was I was great. I'm grateful for that time. I understand that for so many people, it was horrible and it was so bad. And I feel so much empathy for that. But for me, it was actually a much needed break, from all the things that had come before.
And you know what? It's funny. I was just having a conversation with my husband last night about this. And I again, absolutely validating, not discounting. There were a lot of horrible things about the pandemic, and it was a time we lived with a really high degree of fear, and there's a lot of trauma coming out of it, like on a very societal level, not even just individual level, but on a very societal level. And so it's the and part, right?
Right.
And
yes. And
I actually know a number of people who talk about that period of time really fondly, myself as well. Like I would pay a lot of money to have that initial like 3-month, 4-month, whatever it was, lockdown time again, because all the fear was there, but it was also this like, I don't know, sort of surrender to it because we couldn't do anything.
Yes.
Everybody was in the same place. And I got this unexpected period of time with my kids where I couldn't be doing anything else. So we all learned to crochet and did all the things like baking the muffins and doing the things. But my kids were like, you know, graduating from high school that year and in second year university that year. And it was time I never thought I was going to get with them again. I thought they were on their way out the door, and I would spend money to have that time again. So yes to all the bad things. And so many people also have a fondness for that period of time. That is not to be discounted.
No. And for my husband and I mean, we'd spent 5 years living in New York and Miami, you know, seeing each other, you know, maybe once a month if we were lucky, you know, and over the summers when I was on break. But you know, when that happened, we joke about it because we went from like not living together to like 24/7. You know? We're like, okay, well, I guess we're good because we didn't, you know, we still love each other. But it was also a time to just, you know, really dig into our relationship and like explore some of those things that I don't know I would have had the chance to do. So yeah. And then through that, we'd like had enough money put aside for me to kind of like not work for a little bit and really just dig into being an artist. But that, you know, you budget and then life happens and you're like, okay, well now I need to go and find things. So in 2022, I was working in 3 schools in 3 different states every week. I was at Rider University in New Jersey and near Princeton. I was at the New School in New York City, and I was at Berkeley in Boston, and I was teaching contemporary voice. So I was commuting a lot.
Yes.
And then a job opened up at Berkeley, and it was a full-time job in the songwriting department. And I was like, you know what? I'm here. I think I have these skills. Like I've been working really hard to like learn all this stuff. And I got the gig. So now, and I was able to like let go of those other opportunities, which were really amazing. I mean, I'm so grateful that they were there, but it was really stressful to like drive to, you know, train. It was a lot. So I ended up here, and it's been really great because after all the moving around and the pandemic and kind of struggling, I feel like I sort of have some breathing room to just kind of teach the things that I know how to teach really well. And now I have time to like make new records and make new art and go back to really exploring, you know, what I want as an artist now, which I think is very different even from 2019. And I'm not all the way there yet, and it's exciting, and I'm really curious to see like how that kind of unfolds for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, it's kind of a long story, but that's how I got here.
And I think that's the thing about artistry too, that the more we can validate that and acknowledge that artistry changes over time. And it's actually a really good thing that you don't feel like the same artist now that you did 5 years ago. That's development. And if you make the same art over and over and over again for your entire career without there being any development or change, I don't know how fulfilling that is. I mean, I guess it's different depending on who the artist is, but to my way of thinking anyway, it's more fulfilling if you're changing and it's new every time.
Yeah. It's so, I mean, I just find it to be fascinating, and my students will ask me like, how do you still find joy in all of this? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's so fun, like songwriting is the lens through which, and I've discovered this, like through which I see kind of everything.
Yeah.
It's how I process my voice. It's how I work on it. It's how I process some emotions, but it's also just, it's fun. It's fun puzzles. I'll like give myself puzzles to figure out, and improve skills and come up with fun puzzles to give my students. And they're like, are you serious? And I'm like, yeah. Last week was, they had a choice. They could either have a section of the song that had nonsense words in it, or they had to write a 1-word chorus. Or they could combine the two. And I actually had one student who wrote a song and it was called Mumufuku. And it was about like, that's going to cats. It's what they called their cat. And so his 1-word chorus was Mumufuku. And we just died because it was all about his cat. And it was so funny and so brilliant. Yeah.
I love that. Well, we're going to come back to the songwriting stuff in a little bit because I'm going to pick your brains about that some more. But I'm going to start off with a couple of questions that I ask all my guests here.
Cool.
You in particular have a career that includes so many different elements to it, right? Singer, songwriter, voice teacher, music professor, all the things, author, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
And here on the Vocal Lab, we aim to shine a light into the industry through the lens of what I know now that I wish I'd known then. So with that in mind, is there anything that you would do differently if you were starting your career all over again?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I want to say that I don't have any regrets. Like I sort of don't, it's not really a life lens that I ascribe to. Like, I think everything shapes us to where we are. But if I could go back and do it again, I would have gotten into songwriting sooner and followed more artistic paths when I was younger. I kind of got, and not in a bad way, but I got pulled into education, partly because I was living in New York and needed to make rent, and teaching paid a lot more than working at Starbucks or, some of the things. And I wasn't the kind of singer that did wedding gigs. Like that just wasn't really my bag. I didn't have the vocal chops to do that then. I do now, but I did not then. So I think, I wish that I'd started a little sooner, and I wish I'd not let some of the things that I don't even think I realized were stopping me from doing it, like stop me. Yeah.
And conversely, is there anything that you would absolutely do all over again?
I'd totally get my doctorate again.
Yep.
I think that almost more than anything else changed so much for me. And I think part of that was I was 37 when I did it, and I had 7 years in between all of my degrees. And I think the life knowledge that I brought into the program and that I was able to not, I don't want to, wield isn't the right word, but it's sort of like used to my advantage.
Yeah.
Like there were classes that I thought were interesting, but other people hadn't taken them. So I was able to say, well, why can't I take this class? It seems to fit the requirements. And the answers were usually, well, no one's done that before. And I'm like, okay, but it's legal, right? It fits the requirements. And they're like, yeah, it totally does. I know. And what was cool is that other people that came after me then had more options.
Yep.
Because I sort of done some things that they hadn't really thought about in terms of a broader, but I also think just the people I met in that and the places it's taken me and the opportunities it granted me in places that I don't know that I would have had those in similar ways. And it was just, there were really hard things about it. Like it was definitely challenging, but I don't know. That was a good challenge for me at a good time in my life.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I also when I was in my bachelor's program, I was like straight out of high school. It was that point in my life, but I subsequently went back to school in my 30s, and got more training in arts and entertainment management, sort of a different stream of the business.
Yeah.
So going back to school as an adult was such a different experience for me. Because I was in there mostly with kids straight out of high school, but I was in my mid 30s and had 3 kids. And I found that school was so much easier when I was an adult because I went in with a very different, like everything wasn't equally as important to me. I wasn't doing it because I wanted the grade, although as an adult, I did value the grade more than I did as a kid, honestly, but I valued the knowledge. So I could decide whether the knowledge was important enough to me to put the effort in. And I felt like the effort I had to put in to accomplish the thing was different, less because of the life experience that I had brought in. It was like I understood how to do it efficiently that I didn't understand as a kid. So
I fully agree. I mean, when people are asking or, students are like, should I go get a master's? I'm like, well, I mean, it's if you want it, but like go spend at least a year, if not 2 out in the world, because you'll come back. I mean, master's degrees are different. Doctorates are even more different, and just like you, like in my master's, like, I mean, just different things and choices you make. In my doctorate, like I had to take this quantitative statistics class that I was like, I got in and like 3 weeks in, I was like, this is never. This is never for me. I'm like, I want to write songs and like sing on stages and like talk about microphones and voice numbers and ANOVAs and like, oh my gosh, my sister, that's her bag, anyone who loves that stuff. I'm like, yes. But so I ended up looking at the class and being like, okay, well, what do I need to pass this class? Like I have to pass it. It's required. Yeah. But like I did just as much as I needed to pass it and no more. And it's my favorite grade. Because I'm just like, I got a C, I passed the class, my whole rest of my transcript is like all just like, because you want to be there. It's like all A's, and that once I'm so proud of that C. Yep. It's one of those weird things that you're just like, oh, I'm like, yep. But I aimed for it and I got it and I passed the class and I never have to do it again.
I totally get that. And it's interesting because subsequently, the way I talk to my kids about school, because now my kids are university age and 2 of them are in school one of them has finished school now, but one of them is in the thick of her bachelor's and her trajectory is to go right through to her doctorate in her field. But the way I've talked to them about school is so different than I would have before being a student that way, because I do talk to them about what do you need out of this? If all the pressure of all the classes and all the work is overwhelming, does it have to be? Like, do you have to get the very best grade in every single one of these things? I can't answer that for you. You have to decide. If you're wanting to make the honor roll because it qualifies you for a scholarship, then that's a different thing than I need to pass this class because I just need to pass the class, but I don't need to do anything better than that. Because guess what? Nobody looks at your grades on your degree.
No, exactly. Like nobody's looking and going, oh.
Nobody cares what grade you got.
No, exactly. I'm so with you on that. And it's like nobody's looking. And the same thing, it's like I didn't have to stress about that. Instead of stressing, I got to write songs and practice and sing. And oh my gosh, so worth it.
Yep.
You know, I watched the rest of my friends freaking out about it. And just like I needed to get a certain grade to keep my TA-ship and to like complete the program. And it was like, okay, well, what is that? You know, and you don't have that kind of insight usually when you're in college. And it's so valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Along that line, we are in an industry that sees a whole lot of different levels of education in the players and performers in lots of different genres of music, but especially pop music. I think jazz musicians, some of them are self-taught, but a lot of them are a bit more educated just because jazz theory is a much more complicated endeavor than pop theory is. But how has your education impacted your work? Like obviously it's impacted your teaching work, but how has it impacted your work as an artist?
Oh yeah. I think the first thing I would say to that is I've had to learn how to be simpler with my harmonic choices.
Yeah.
In the jazz world, you know, good or, you know, you get rated by how complex something is, right?
Yes.
And pop music is complex, but it's not complex harmonically.
Yep.
It's complex in a lot of different ways. And it took me a little while to wrap my head around that and to also just kind of sit with that as being okay. Because when you're in jazz school, you get taught like, well, 1, 4, 5, you know, the blues is cool, but like, if you do 1, 6, 4, 5, like that's just, you know, it needs to have, you know, a minor 7 flat 5 chord in there somewhere, or, you know, it's not valid, you know. And I think writing my first 3-chord song was my happiest, most joyful, most triumphant moment ever because it worked. And it was so hard for me to get there. I think when you don't have that knowledge and you're working with something that you don't have knowledge of, it's way easier to get to that harmonic choice because you just don't know all the other options. But when you're coming with all the other options in your bag, you know, it's like you're going to the beach and you have this like bucket and it's got, you know, a shovel and it's got a, you know, it's got all these cool things and like you can build the coolest sandcastle, you know, but when you come with a bucket and a shovel and that's it, there's only a certain amount of things you might think of or be able to do just because you don't have all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that your castle isn't going to look like a castle, you know? It'll look cool. It'll just look different. And in pop, what I discovered was like the complexity lies in the, not in the harmony, but in the melodies and the craft of the lyrics and how you phrase those lyrics within the lines and the rhythm of the lyrics and the melodic rhythm and also the production, like what is supporting the emotional impact of the song and how do you do that in a way that feels honest and doesn't feel overbearing, but also like carries you on a journey. And that became fun, you know? So I think it has, but in that same vein, as I said, I learned to play guitar like 4 years ago at this point. And that has been one of the most freeing artistic things for me because I'm going to admit this, I don't really understand the way the guitar works yet. I still don't know all the names of the notes. I often have no idea what chord I'm playing when I'm playing it. And that has been liberating and free because on the piano, my theory is attached to my fingers. And so if I want to play, you know, the secondary dominant in any key, like my fingers will just go there and I'm not even thinking about it. It's just like they're going there. But on the guitar, I'm using my ears and using my instincts a lot more and moving around in just cool sound land.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, well, what is this? And I put on my tuner and I figure out what the notes are. And I'm like, oh, it's an E minor 7 flat 5. That's cool. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I didn't necessarily identify that as part of the thing. So yeah, that's been fun.
I learned to play guitar, gosh, it was probably about 15 years ago now or so, but I did it. I remember saying to my brother, I want you to come with me because I want to buy a guitar and I don't know anything. My brother plays guitar. He's a guitar player. And I don't know anything about guitars. So I want you to come with me so that, here's my budget and I don't even know what's good or not. So he came with me, picked out a guitar, and I said, I just want a new instrument to write on because I play piano and I'm writing the same thing over and over again, basically. And I'm bored of it. So I just want a new instrument to write on. I'm never going to play on stage. I'm never going to. And he goes, don't be so sure. Because I was like, so I don't need a pickup in my guitar. I don't need any of that. Within a year, I was playing on stage. But what I loved about don't get me wrong. I'm not a good guitar player. I can only play rhythm and only acoustic. I can't play electric guitar. But it was never my goal to be a guitar player. But what I love about it is that sense that you can just find shapes and then just move them up and down the fretboard. And what does that sound when I leave the E string open and I take that shape and I move it up 4 frets and but those bottom 2 strings are still sitting open, and it's all of a sudden it's all this like modal feeling stuff moving around, and it's just different.
It's so cool. Do you work in alternate tunings too, where like you really have no idea?
But no.
Try like DADGAD or Open D, and like holy moly, like the things you find. Because then you really have no idea, that E chord shape that you used to know was like an E chord is no longer an E chord. Yeah. It's like some other chord. And you're like, oh, but it moves and it's so cool. And now I sound like Joni Mitchell. It's so cool. Yeah.
I really enjoyed it for that. I also found it interesting moving to guitar from piano because it was way easier to pick up that instrument because I wasn't learning music all over again. I was just applying it to different shapes in my hand.
Me too.
I just had to be shown a few chords.
Exactly. And that's why I don't worry about it. In fact, that's how I learned how to play.
Yeah.
Like my guitar, I took lessons like every other week just as an accountability thing and make sure I wasn't like doing weird things with my hands and carpal tunnel, like kind of stuff. But, he would give me chord shapes and, strumming patterns or picking patterns. And I would write him a new song every 2 weeks. Like that's how I learned how to play. I can play one other person. I can play Both Sides Now by Joni Mitchell. That is the only cover that I can actually play on the guitar. Everything else is mine. Which I think is it's been really fascinating and fun.
That's awesome. I learned, my brother taught me how to play Hotel California, which has enough shapes in it that I then knew my bar chord shapes and a few open chords. And I took one lesson. He showed me the chords for Hotel California. Other than that,
amazing.
I just made it up myself.
Oh, that's so good. So good.
But so fun. Thanks for joining us today. So that was actually just part 1 of our interview. And I would love it if you come back on Thursday to check out the second part of our interview. There's so much more juicy goodness. I can't wait for you to check it out.